First, here in my monologue, the seizure of Gillian Maxwell, the daughter of the late thief robber baron Robert Maxwell, and seldom has an apple fallen closer to the tree than Gillian Maxwell. She was the old thief, the old scoundrel's favourite child, so much so that he named his yacht, off the back of which he fell or was pushed, the Lady Gillian. Well, Lady Gillian is currently behind bars, tasting porridge for the first time. Or is she? Has a deal been done with the FBI? Is it remotely plausible that they did not know that she was hiding out in New Hampshire when they were supposedly scouring the world to interview her as a suspect, having been named by literally dozens of young girls, some of them small children, who claim that Gillian Maxwell and Jeffrey Epstein sexually abused them, attacked them, raped them. That's right, capital R, rape. There ain't no consent with a 14-year-old girl, Gillian. And of course, Prince Andrew, who famously cannot sweat, was last seen sweating because, of course, Gillian Maxwell was the air bridge between the Jeffrey Epstein operation and the British royal family. Epstein regarded Prince Andrew and described him to witnesses as his Super Bowl icon. He was the jewel, imagine, what a tawdry crown that must have been, the jewel in Epstein's crown, but there were many other crusties in that crown. The former president of the United States, Bill Clinton, for one. The would-be president of the United States, Hillary Clinton, for another. The former Prime Minister of Israel, Ehud Barak, and many, many other people are in this grisly tale of the Epstein operation. Now, I watched, as I told you, the Netflix series on Epstein, and it was very well done, and it demonstrated beyond any contradiction the loathsome immorality of the Epstein circle and the black book in which many big names are written have got something to answer for. I'm not saying that the likes of Tony Blair and Peter Mandelson were ever up to no good with young girls on Paedophile Island or in the gigantic townhouse in Manhattan, which Epstein miraculously purchased for $1 off the owner of Victoria's Secrets. Quite a secret, that one, how that $1 purchase came about. I'm not saying that those who are in the black book are necessarily suspect of high crimes, grave felons, but they do have to explain what first attracted them to the billionaire Jeffrey Epstein. They do have to explain why they were so friendly with Epstein, and especially after he had already been convicted of sex offences against young girls. And preeminent amongst those is, of course, the Queen's son, Prince Andrew. Now, we have a remarkable standoff here. Prince Andrew claims that he's more than happy to cooperate with the FBI. The FBI keep demanding that Prince Andrew cooperates with them. So I'm offering myself this evening to bring the two parties together. I'm more than happy to broker a series of interviews between the FBI and His Royal Highness or His Royal Lowness, depending on how the interviews go. But somebody somewhere must be able to bring these two parties who say they're desperately keen to meet and talk and answer questions, must be able to bring them together. So much for the sex. It's always interesting, and in this case, it is utterly revolting, repulsive, disgusting, as low as it gets. But I also want to follow the money. I want to know where Epstein got all that money, because there is no discernible trace of how he earned billions of dollars, much of which he left, but most of which he spent on a lifestyle that can only be described as plutocratic. He was living as if he was one of the richest men on the earth, in which case, where did he get that money? Whose money was it? Gillian Maxwell, it's said, was given a $4 million helicopter as a present from Jeffrey Epstein. Where did that money come from? Where did the money come from for this series of luxurious properties all over the United States, all over Europe, and of course, infamously, in the Caribbean, where that island will come to be the focus of much attention when Gillian Maxwell goes on trial? Now, I'd be very surprised if Gillian Maxwell were to commit suicide in her cell. Probably not quite as surprised as she would be, but it's very, very important that the United States authorities keep this woman alive, because she must see the inside of a courtroom. She must be made to answer the allegations that still stand against her and her late benefactor. It is remarkable because I have, since the early 1980s, been at war with the Maxwell family, since the day, probably before it, that her father, Robert Maxwell, punched me full in the solar plexus in a BBC green room just before going on television for a live question time broadcast in full view of Sir Robin Day and the other panelists on the show that night. "Ah, Mr. Galloway, the PLO man," he said, prior to thumping me in the stomach so hard that I bent double and stood up straight with tears running down my face. I tabled motions in the House of Commons, asked questions in the House of Commons, covered, of course, by parliamentary privilege, which was the only way that the truth about Robert Maxwell could be uttered in this country without being crushed in a legal action, in a legal system that Maxwell manipulated to the ultimate degree. In the end, Mr. Maxwell, admittedly posthumously, had to buy me a car and a wing on my house, had to pay me a very substantial sum in damages, having defamed me in retaliation for my naming him in Parliament for multiple criminal activities. But more of that, I'm sure, later. Donald Trump was a pal of Jeffrey Epstein too, just not as big a pal as Bill Clinton and Hillary Clinton appear to have been, or Peter Mandelson, for that matter. So the Epstein affair is perhaps not an existential danger to Donald Trump's presidency, but there are other existential dangers. As I said earlier in my introduction, the bookies are taking bets now and offering short odds on Trump being forced out of the race by plummeting poll numbers. The basement tapes, pitiful though they are, for Biden are still coming out, and Biden's opinion poll rating is currently 50% to Donald Trump's 36%. Even in Ohio, Biden is substantially ahead of Trump, which would mean an electoral college landslide. Now you may say, why? Why would Trump bow out? There appears still to be life in him, just not life as we know it. Well, here's the reason. Donald Trump's going to badly need a pardon, and he can't pardon himself. If he is not to spend the rest of his life behind bars or in courts trying to stay out of prison, he's going to need a president in place that can pardon him for any crime or misdemeanor that he may have committed. That would argue in favor of him making way before November for Vice President Pence, who would then pardon President Trump, who could then go off to golf till his heart's content and as long as his bone spurs sustained him on the 18-hole walk around the course. It's a long shot for me. I don't myself see it, but it's short odds now at the bookmakers in the United States of America. We'll be discussing it with Robbie Martin and Anya Parampil in the show today. We'll be talking, of course, about Venezuela, where, as I think predicted last week in the short which we showed you from RT, that the High Court in London would legalise theft without even wearing a mask. They legalised the theft of $1 billion worth of Venezuelan gold bullion, handing it to a man in the street on the flimsiest of grounds that that man had declared himself to be the president of Venezuela. It has not just been a theft, it's been a murder. It has murdered London's reputation as a financial centre. And I have no hesitation in saying to anyone who will listen, don't keep your money in London. If I were to win the national lottery, the last place in the world I'd keep the money is London, because London's banks are run by thieves. 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 That's what you've done, High Court justices. That's what you've done, Her Majesty's government. You've destroyed one of the few assets that this country any longer possesses, that of being a safe haven for people's money. As safe as the Bank of England used to be a thing when I was young. Turns out the Bank of England ain't safe at all. And we'll be talking, of course, about the Scottish nationalist cagoules at the border with their suits. I don't know what you call them, nuclear, biological, chemical suits, and hoods, and gloves, and rubber over their shoes, who were arranged over the border between Scotland and England, telling English travellers entering Scotland, how they knew they were English travellers, of course, is a moot point, because I was one of them, perfectly legally, going from one part of my country to another part of my country, telling them to get the F out of Scotland, but to leave their money before they turned back. Because, of course, the Scottish economy, like the English and Welsh economies, would literally now have collapsed if it were not for the expenditure of the monies from the Treasury in London, from the taxpayer of the entire UK, which has, through the furlough scheme, saved the jobs of many hundreds of thousands of people in Scotland and many tens of thousands of businesses. So tourists from England, not wanted on voyage. Furlough, taxpayers' money, leave it, please, at the border, and we'll pick it up. This on the day that the independence side of the great debate in Scotland finally tipped in favour of the Scottish nationalists. 54% say in a poll of 1,124 people, admittedly, that they will be voting for independence if another referendum comes along. And only, therefore, that's more or less a reversal of the figure that was achieved in 2014, the first time this matter was considered in a referendum which we were told was a once-in-a-lifetime affair, once-in-a-generation affair at least, but which turned out to not be accepted by those who lost it, who've been agitating for another go in the morning ever since. My position is clear. I think the breaking up of a small island of English-speaking people would be a very bad idea, and it would be particularly bad for the Scottish working class, which is the class about which I care the most.